So we are convening the meeting of the Town of Westborough Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And we have a packed agenda today. We will have a guest speaker at 4 o'clock today. John Arnold, our town moderator, is joining us to talk a bit about town meeting. And in the meantime, we will, do we need to go through no, we're only in person, right? So, sorry. So we'll just, we're an in-person meeting today being broadcast on Westborough TV, and that will be made available, I believe, tomorrow on Westborough TV's website. So the first order of our business is to take a look at our minutes from our last meeting. Have you all had an opportunity to review? Is there a motion to accept them?
I pass a motion that we accept the minutes from the last meeting.
As written?
As
Yeah?
written.
Okay, no amendments. Second, and all in favor? Okay, and those are accepted unanimously. Thank you. And now we'll move on to open forum, which is where we have an opportunity for residents to, I think we have none who are here to make a statement, but we have observations, so thank you for coming. And that's our open forum, unless anyone wants to speak in open forum or ask any questions. Okay. And then, in terms of issues or recent updates and correspondence, we have a couple of things that are coming up. This is a big month in March for the town. We have our open election for open seats, and there are a number of candidates running for those open seats. There will be a candidates forum on March 5th at 6 p.m., and that's going to be broadcast on Westborough TV. And that is in preparation for the town election, which I believe is on March 14th. Thank you. And and then we have town meeting coming up on Saturday, March 25th at 9 a.m. We'll hear more about town meeting when we hear from John Arnold in a little while. And then we also received, I need to open it. We also received a letter from our former chair, Kara Presley, who she sent a letter to Shazi and I and asked for us to read this to the committee. So I'll go ahead and do that with this. So this is from Kara. Dear Westborough Diversity and Inclusion Committee, thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time today so that I can let you know that I will be leaving my position as Director of Westborough Youth and Family Services at the end of this month. I would have preferred to share this with you in person, but was not able to attend today's meeting. In March, I'll begin working at Jewish Family and Children's Services of Greater Boston as the organization's mental health director, a brand new position created at the large nonprofit social service agency to identify the most urgent mental health needs in the community and to create new and improved programming to meet those needs. It's an awesome opportunity for which I'm very excited. Before I transition to my new role, however, I'm taking time to reflect on the 4.5 years I spent working in Westborough, and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been a significant part of that experience. When I interviewed for this job at Youth and Family Services, I shared with the interview team my passion for social and racial justice and my priority for creating inclusive, accessible mental health and social services. As soon as I was hired, the assistant town manager at the time, now the town manager, invited me to attend D&I meetings. Within months, I was an appointed member, and I was soon voted in as the chair, a role I held for 3 years. For those of you who were on the committee with me during those 3 years, you know that we had our ups and downs. Luckily, the ups included a few dedicated committee members and the outspoken support of many community members, which held me up through the down times. Last summer, when members recommended to restructure the committee, I made the decision to step down, but I never let go of my passion and hopes for the town of Westborough to forge ahead in pursuit of more diverse, inclusive, and equitable town government and services. Now that I am no longer a member of the D&I committee, and now that I am leaving my position as a Westborough town employee, any opinion or recommendation that I might offer to the town related to diversity inclusion may hold little weight, but because of my history and valued relationship with this group, I hope that you will give these final thoughts a moment of your consideration. Please do not give up on pursuing a DEI assessment survey audit of town government and services. Municipalities across the Commonwealth are increasingly making this a common practice, and such an audit can be conducted so that it complements and does not duplicate the other roadmaps that the town has undertaken, such as the strategic plan, master plan, staffing study, senior needs assessment, et cetera. The results and recommendations coming out of an audit will offer benefits for personnel recruitment and retention, resident access and engagement, and so much more. In the last year that I was on this committee, other members supported me in countless hours of research and preparation to demonstrate the need and rationale to pursue a DEI audit, and it would be a loss for the town not to build on that effort. Thank you to every one of you who make your membership on this committee a priority. Westborough is really lucky to have you. Thank you all for being my community while I've been here. I could not have done what I did without you being in it with me. I appreciate you. Warmly, Kara Presley. Yeah. So nice to hear from Kara. It's a loss for town that she's moving on, but it sounds like a great opportunity for her. And I think, she was with us. She led this group for so long. I think, we have at this point, had conversations about an audit or a survey or some sort of a needs assessment. And I think, that may keep coming up. We may need to revisit it at certain times. I think at this point, we have decided to kind of take the approach of doing what we can do with what we have right now, knowing that that takes a lot of planning and funding and support within across the community, but it may be revisited at another time. And I think Kara's words are wise, that there are other towns that, as momentum builds, that we may want to jump on, get into that momentum. So thank you, Kara, and thank you her for her years of service with the committee. I think that was everything that we had, just in terms of business or correspondence. Do any of you have any other events or updates since we last met?
I don't.
Okay, thanks. I keep losing my agenda here. Thank you. Kara's watching us on Westborough TV, so she says thanks. Thank you to Kara. All right, so with that, and I see John Arnold is here, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but if you don't mind going, presenting to us now, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, I'm John Arnold, Town Moderator.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, and nice to meet you. I don't know if I've met you all in person. I know you all, but nice to meet you all, and nice to be here. I had sent along a little bit just of an overview of some stuff I'd done about town meeting, and I gathered that this was mostly a discussion about how to improve outreach, attendance, diversity, and inclusion at town meetings, so I don't have any prepared remarks unless you want me to go through the presentation. And other than that, I'll here to answer your questions or to just tell me how to join the discussion, and I'll join you.
I think I would love to hear the presentation. I think that makes, and then we can also enter it into the kind of the, the documents. Okay. I think, you prepared it, and we'd love to hear it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I didn't prepare it just for you, so don't think I went to this trouble.
No.
It was something, let's see, wow, almost 7 years ago. So it's,
no, but I mean, it's all relevant.
And I won't go through it in detail because I don't want to take all, I do want to leave time for discussion. Okay, so do you all, I know I didn't bring a laptop or anything to present it. Do you all have copies?
It was sent out prior to the meeting.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
So anyway, so I've been involved in town government or state government in some way since I was like 17 years old. And I've lived in Westborough since I was going into 3rd grade. So almost everything I learned about town meeting, I've learned from attending town meeting and from watching our previous town moderator, Joe Harrington, who I think was one of the best town moderators that I've seen from the people I've talked to. And I've given talks like this all the way from like elementary school to high school to Cub Scouts groups as well as to adults. So we'll upscale it to adults and do that. So the key thing when we think about town meeting, and it's a little bit odd, and as you'll see from the title of this, town meeting may seem like it's just yet another series of meetings in the town, but it's actually the town's legislative body. And that's what makes it different. And by having an open town meeting, that Westborough has where every voter can show up. Every voter is not only there to participate, but they're there to be a kind of citizen legislator for the day. And unlike most other legislatures that we think of, so the examples here on the first page, we always most often think of legislatures at the federal and the state level, where we elect people to represent our interests, and then we try to persuade them to vote our way. Well, with an open town meeting form of government, every voter can show up and be a legislator for the day, and they don't have to persuade anyone unless they want to. Those who participate in deliberations often want to try to sway people one way or the other, but we have a number of people who come just to vote their mind and vote for what they individually think is in the best interests of the town of Westborough. So you can sit there passively, or you can participate more vocally. So as we know, going on to it, what's the deal about having a legislature at all? Well, the way our governmental system breaks down at the federal, state, and town level, or city level even, is that there's legislative and executive branches. Again, most of what we learn and most of what we experience has to do with the federal and state level. So we all know that we vote for Congress people, we vote for senators, we vote for president. Congress is the legislative body. They raise the money, they decide how the money is to be spent, they decide what the rules of the road are, and then all of those laws and all those budgets get run day to day by the executive branch. So as I'm sure all of you know, we have a select board, and this is where it gets a little weird for people. We have a select board that is a body of 5 people that acts as the head of the executive branch. So whereas at the federal level we elect a president, and whereas at the state level we elect a governor, a single person, in towns or in cities we often, not every city, because some cities have a one city manager who runs the executive branch. In town government, we have a select board that essentially are 5 people acting as a unit to run the executive branch. And as professionalism has come over time, and as we've had more and more professionalism of town departments, the select board delegates a lot of that responsibility to the town manager and the town manager's reports. Now, just a little bit of history, just so you understand how this all evolved, we have to recognize that town meeting form of government really evolved from the way the Protestant churches ran the colonies back in the day. So most of what we see in terms of having a body to essentially run a church, and then they would appoint a pastor or a minister to run the church, that's all evolved over time such that we now have a very similar structure. But even at the town level, even back when I was first involved in town government, it used to be that the town coordinator at the time worked for, at that point, called the selectman. It was a town coordinator, now it's a town manager. But it used to be that the budgets of the town weren't necessarily developed by the town department heads. It used to be that the advisory finance committee that we still have, but before the professionalism, it used to be that the advisory finance committee was, at the time, a bunch of, mostly middle-aged white guys with 1 or 2 women and 1 or 2 younger people would have Saturday meetings or evening meetings down in the old town hall where they would have come town department heads present to them what their needs were, and then they would pretty much develop the budget from scratch. Now, we know that's not the way it's done now. Now we have much more professionalism. We have much more, we have more technology. And now there's much more delegation of the department heads to develop their budgets, submit them to the town manager. The town manager rolls them up and presents a proposed budget to the select board and the finance committee, and so it goes. So part of keeping in mind of why things are the way they are is to just to see that there's this evolution over time of having essentially a lot of volunteer boards have a lot of volunteer responsibility, and now with more professionalism, the volunteer boards sort of guide the direction of the town and choose the priorities, and a lot of what they do is, a lot of the important part is making recommendations about which direction the town should go, where should the town spend its money, and especially important hiring decisions about who are the professionals who can do the best job for the town. And again, the executive branch in a town is a little bit different because in addition to the town manager and the management team, because of the way the state laws are run, The select board doesn't have absolute control over what people might consider the executive branch. The school committee pretty much has exclusive control over the schools, the school buildings and that. The library trustees have exclusive control over the library buildings and their budget, and to some extent the planning board has special dispensation for how it presents planning articles. So it's a little bit murky, but I think the idea of that there's a legislative branch that essentially decides the bylaws, sets the budgets, and does that, and then hands that responsibility off to the executive branch. So I think I've covered a lot of this, but so the key thing is in our town meeting, we have an open town meeting. There is a choice. Towns can choose to have an open town meeting or a representative town meeting. A representative town meeting, think of it as essentially a middle ground between every voter can show up and vote versus a large number of voters can show up and vote. So typically, I think the most common representative town meeting now is, rather than, right now, we've had town meetings with everything from like 50 or 60 people up to almost 1,500 people. Obviously difficult to plan for at times. At representative town meetings, my understanding is that the typical is somewhere between 120 and 250 representatives. So again, that's moving toward the direction of not every citizen gets to be their own citizen legislator, but you elect representatives to the town meeting who then hear all the arguments and then they vote on what they think is best from their constituency's point of view.
X number of people per precinct.
I'll have to check. I believe typically it's done X number per precinct, but some towns I think also have a number of at-large as well, which everyone, yeah, so. I can look into that if there's interest. Yeah, right, yeah.
So many people
Yes, but
per
typically
precinct.
there's at least guaranteed to be at a precinct level.
And so, John, is
Yeah.
each town's structure set up by the town,
Yes.
or is
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that was set up in 1770 or
Well,
whatever?
yes,
Westborough?
essentially we have a town, well, yeah, so another thing, so there's a town charter, and that is voted on by the voters, but then has to be approved by the state. So that's sometimes you call that's our home rule charter or whatever. So that's essentially the basic structure. For instance, it's that document that says there are 5 select board members, there's a town moderator, what are their terms and things like that. And then, so that's the high-level structure that changes quite infrequently. I've been on a couple government study committees that have changed the charter over time. And then there's the town bylaws, and that's a much thicker book, and the bylaws are what the town chooses to have its own laws to conduct itself, subject, of course, to there's some things the town can't decide on all of its own. And then another sort of weird sidetrack is that the town meeting votes on the zoning articles, but the Attorney General reviews them. The Attorney General's office typically reviews everything the town meeting does to make sure, it was something the town can do, but they pay a special attention to the zoning bylaws. And so occasionally you'll see the town clerk, like N number of days after a town meeting, will essentially say, oh, the Attorney General has ruled that, these actions were okay or wanted to tweak this. The most recent example I can think of that was at last fall's special town meeting, I think it was, we had a citizen, maybe it was further longer than that, maybe it was the annual town meeting. We had a couple citizens petitions about recyclable bags. And one of the things the town meeting voted on was a proposal to require stores to charge at least 10 cents for a bag. And after the Attorney General reviewed that, I don't remember the details, the town clerk's office has their opinion. The town clerk said, well, that whole bylaw that you put in place was okay, but the town doesn't have the authority to tell stores they must charge 10 cents, a minimum of 10 cents per bag. So that whole bylaw went into effect, but the Attorney General struck that provision. So, that covers that. Another interesting thing is, and again, as we know, the entire American government is set up as a relatively simple but simultaneously complex set of checks and balances. So the check and balance of town meeting itself is that although I am elected to preside over and make rulings in terms of parliamentary procedure and making sure things run correctly, in terms of what's on the warrant, and the warrant is actually the actions the town is asked to take, that's all determined by the select board. So essentially, I alone can't put something on the warrant, and I alone don't decide it. Essentially, the check and balances, the select board chooses the date, time, and place of the meeting, and then once the meeting happens, I run the meeting. And of course, we get along. we talk to each other to make sure, like, I'm in town and make sure we know what's going on, and we try to think through possible loopholes or whatever. And so once the warrant is posted, think of that as the agenda for the meeting, and unlike business meetings like this one, where it's a little easier to slide in a new thing like, oh, let's talk about this, because the word warrant comes from the word warning, the same root word as warning. The warrant essentially guides the topics and the scope of topics that can be acted upon at town meeting. And the idea of this, and the reason why it's to think of warrant, think of warning, is that if somebody wants to have the town act on an item that's not on the warrant, then that's out, I call that out of order, and that's because the townspeople haven't been warned that that may be something they're asked to vote on. So there are people who make individual decisions based on personal circumstance about whether they will or won't attend this particular thing. So, so for instance, let's say everybody says like, oh, that looks like there's nothing I'm interested in. We had a special town meeting once in this room with, I think, 1 or 2 articles. And so it was, we needed to do, I think we needed to accept a grant, and I think we needed to do something else. And so needless to say, that was the town meeting where I think we had 50 or 60 people show up. Now, if somebody at the end of that meeting said like, hey, let's allocate $100 million, to pave the streets with gold, that's out of order, because there are plenty of people who say, hey, if we want to do that, I didn't know you were going to talk about that, or I would have shown up. So that's the whole idea. When I talk about, if you go to town meeting or watch town meeting, if you hear me talk about that's out of scope, the scope questions that moderators get asked to think about are, have the other voters who aren't here been sufficiently warned that we might take that action? And things like that.
John, do you get to vote?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
Yes, I typically, when I have
should have asked you that 20
when
years
I have
ago.
when I have electronic voting machine, I vote and I keep it to myself.
Well, yeah,
And when we raise hands, I typically don't vote, but it's up to me. I can vote, but I'm not required to vote.
Okay, I just wondered if that was.
Yeah, there's no rule that says I can't vote.
Oh,
By being
right.
moderator, I don't disenfranchise. My role is to essentially be impartial, and so I don't take a public stand on anything, and I don't. That's why if I ever want to speak in favor or against an article, I let one of the deputy moderators take over.
Okay.
So, and the idea is hopefully people can judge by my actions that I am treating everyone fairly. But at the end of the day, if I think it matters to me, I vote. So going back on, we're now on page 4, and the town clerk is the other official person. The town meeting can't start without a town clerk or the town meeting designating someone to act as the clerk, because they are the official record keeper of the meeting. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just before you move on
Yeah.
to the warrant,
Yeah.
would you just briefly touch upon the types of articles?
Okay, sure.
The
Would-
specifically citizen petition?
Oh, yeah, I think they're.
Is that coming?
Yeah, they're
Sorry.
coming up. Yeah, they're coming
Okay.
up. Yeah, no problem. Remind me if I don't. Yeah. Yeah, because those are special. Yes. So the warrant is anything that, I'll tease it a little bit. The warrant is anything the select board wants to put on the warrant, but there are provisions in state law that allow citizens to essentially petition the select board to require them to put an article on the warrant. So if you see something citizens petition, that means it went through that path, and we'll talk about that.
And there's a certain number of citizens that need to support.
Yes,
that
yeah, and and interesting. It changes depending on the type of meeting, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
So anyway, I think here's where the first place I've just noticed, I sent you out of date. It used to be that the town meeting, oh no, it is still the second Saturday after the March election. The date of the March election moved. The March election used to be, I think, the first Tuesday, but there were too many conflicts with presidential primaries and things. So a town meeting a year or so ago voted to change when the election was, and so the town meeting starts on the second Saturday after the election. So now, of course, I've forgotten my calendar. I think the town election this year is on the 14th, and town meeting starts Saturday, March 25th.
You got it.
It used to be that town meeting started at 1 in the afternoon on Saturday, but there's been, as people have wanted to have fewer chances that the town meeting drifts over to Monday night or Tuesday night, now town meeting starts on that Saturday at 9 a.m. Again, the date, time, place, all up to the selectmen. There are bylaws that guide the selectmen with choices about when the voters would like it to happen, but it's always up to the select board.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Uh, So you said drifting over from Saturday to Monday night. What is that? How does that happen?
Okay.
I know how. Let me rephrase that. I know how it happens
Yeah,
with lots of
but why?
conversation,
Yeah.
but when
What's
is
the
the
process?
decision made
Yeah,
to say, okay, calling
Yeah,
it?
and
we need
yeah,
to move on?
and this is an interesting thing. Again, my role is
Yes,
to
it is.
my role is to run the meeting. But
Right.
once the meeting starts, almost every action is subject to the constraints of the warrant and to the will of the voters.
Mhm.
At any point along the line when it's not interrupting a particular discussion underway, a voter can move to recess the meeting.
Okay.
And at that point, it's up to the voters to decide.
I
So,
see.
so for those of you who remember last March when we had our marathon starting at 9 in the morning and ending at 12:30 on Sunday morning with an hour and a half break for dinner, somebody moved to recess at 11 o'clock because we had like 3 or 4 articles left. And it was deliberated, and the voters who were there decided that they were going to keep going. I don't think at the time any of them knew there were 2.5 hours of work left, but it's up to them. And so
Yeah, okay.
so again, it's not, I can certainly look to the select board or look to a voter for guidance, but it's not really my job to decide when I think the voters have had enough. It's my job to let voters express their interest. And so, one of the things that voters can realize is that if the majority of voters think that they've had enough for the day and want to move on to another day, they just have to persuade all the a majority of the voters who are there to recess. And I believe the only rules are the recess or the adjournment has to be to a particular date, time, and place.
Which is proposed by the.
What the motion would have, yeah, yeah, so a voter can, this is where my job is to help voters accomplish what they want to accomplish. So I try not to take positions. I help voters craft motions for things I don't have an interest in, things I care about a lot, and things that I don't really care that much about. But my job is, part of my job is to help voters. So if somebody raised their hand and said, Mr. Moderator, I move we adjourn, I would probably say, okay, first of all, what's your name and address for the record? And then I would say, if you want to adjourn, can you suggest the date, time, and place? And we'd figure it out.
Okay, and that's not dictated by the select board?
No, they're usually, because I'm running the meeting and it's not that easy to pay attention to all the details and minutiae, usually the select board are getting the sense of the room by looking
Sure.
around, and often they will make a suggestion, but if the town wants to go a different direction, then that's fine. And then the only real caveat is obviously the place has to accommodate enough voters for whatever it is.
Yeah, that's interesting, because, I'm saying that because you said that the select board selects, the Saturday at 9 o'clock,
Mhm.
and the bylaw says that it has to follow the second Saturday after the election.
Yeah,
But reconvening is
it's up to the meeting.
up
Yeah.
to the meeting
Uh-huh.
itself.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right, yeah. And yeah.
Interesting.
We try, just so voters don't get confused, we try to standardize it. Typically, the select board has a motion ready to go that if it's like 11 at night and we're not done, they will suggest, typically it's everybody sort of trained to say, well, we'll expect a motion 7 o'clock, high school,
Right.
Monday.
Right,
But if
right.
Monday were a holiday,
Yeah, it's-
or if there was a big observance, then it could be Tuesday. There's no time it has to be. And at the risk of completely boring you with details, a couple of years ago, a state law was passed that allows me, in consultation with the select board, to say that a meeting's not going to happen, and I get to decide the date, time, and place in consultation with public safety and with the select board if there's an emergency. So for instance, again, I don't want to
March.
take all your time with stories. There was one year when something came up that I believe it was something unexpected came up, and everybody in town decided that an October special town meeting shouldn't be held on the date that the warrant was posted for because it was either a religious holiday or it was a holiday or something came up. And the way the law used to be, the only way that meeting could not happen on that date would be for the moderator, the town clerk, and voters to show up. And of course, there is a provision that says if a quorum doesn't show up, then the moderator can say we can't proceed because there was no quorum. But I've heard stories from the olden times, meaning more than 10 years ago, that in order for that to happen, the police would have to go get the moderator and the town clerk and bring them to the place to say, look, it's not safe to have a meeting, let's adjourn. And so there is now a law that says if we know there's going to be a foot of snow, I can consult with the fire, police chief, and select board, and I can make a declaration that the meeting has been postponed and reconvened, and then I just have to sign a piece of paper, and either myself or the police can tape the piece of paper to the door
I see.
to say that. So, and that's actually what happened 3 years ago with COVID.
Right.
Before COVID lockdown happened, the select board the week before had already posted the warrant. So and I don't know of a way the select board can retrieve and recant the warrant. So there's pictures of me on Instagram or Facebook where I would go down the week before and I'd say, here's a declaration as a public emergency. And because the law says I can only postpone it 30 days, I went in March and I said postpone till April. I went in April and said postpone till May. I went in May and said postpone till June. And then surprisingly in June we had a town meeting.
And it was the hottest day.
It was very, yes, and it was very hot. Yeah, all right. So we're getting through, yeah. So anyway, so
Okay.
I've talked about most of these rules. So some specific rules for Westborough. Okay, well, we'll talk about, so we have every town has to have an annual town meeting. That's where the budgets get approved, and that has to be held before June 30th because without that, the town wouldn't have a budget to pay for things starting July 1st. Westborough has a bylaw that essentially has a regular special town meeting, and I'll explain that. The town only has exactly one annual town meeting. Every other meeting is a kind of special town meeting. But a number of years ago, when the number of articles on the warrant would creep up to 60 or 70 things, it was decided that a number of those things didn't have to be done in March, April, or May, depending on when the town meeting was at the time. And we could have a regularly scheduled special town meeting in October, figuring the new fiscal year has begun, there can be some cleanup. Sometimes that's an okay time to deal with some zoning issues and whatever. So what I call the regularly scheduled special town meeting is approximately the third Monday in October. Again, that's set by the select board. So ignore the fact it says set by town bylaw. It turns out that recently it's been clarified by town council that although town bylaws can suggest a date, time, and place for any of these meetings, the state law clearly says that the select board has final determination. So typically ours is the Monday after either the Columbus Day or an Indigenous Peoples' Day holiday, whichever you call it. And I believe there's a warrant article coming this year that may change that from being on the Monday to actually also start on Saturday at 9. Again, with the theory is if we can get people there and we can get a whole day in, it could be that we can get the whole meeting done either in one day rather than potentially Monday and Tuesday or whatever. We'll see how that goes. And then other special town meetings can be called by the select board, and these slides predate the change of selectmen to select board, so I'll apologize for that. And now we're also getting into the purview of the special town meeting, so I'll jump to that now. So let's just skip slide 6, and yeah, we'll just. I know actually part of this is on slide 6, I believe, or is it somewhere else? But we'll do this now. So, oh, actually, it's bundled in here. So for an annual town meeting, already scheduled, the voters already know it's happening. A citizen can petition to have an article added with signatures of 10 voters. Essentially, that's the way it is. Again, people can write citizens petitions to do things, and it will be on the warrant because the select board is essentially compelled to put them on the warrant. But that doesn't mean that the town has the authority to do what people want to do. So sometimes people will say, I'd like to do this. And we have a discussion, we have a vote, but it'll be made clear by town council that it's really just a sense of the meeting vote. That happens sometimes, but we've also had places where somebody's worked long and hard to come up with a very specific proposal, and we go ahead. So that's 10. So, and historically, what I understand from that, it's 10 voters because the town already knows there's an annual town meeting. And so everybody knows to show up and that there might be stuff on it to be worth looking at the warrant to see if they want to vote on. Now, for special town meetings, as it says here in other town meetings, that whenever the select board calls a special town meeting for any reason, so let's say the select board is discussing and has opened a warrant and is discussing putting things on a warrant, again, because the select board is making the town aware that there's going to be a special town meeting, at that point a citizen's petition can be put on the warrant with 100 signatures. Again, because the idea is the select board's acting, people may be paying attention, and done that. The final thing is that if the select board doesn't have a special town meeting scheduled, if people want to appeal to a select board at open forum and say, we'd like to have a special town meeting to talk about this, and the select board seems reluctant or hesitant to do it, then a citizen's petition with 200 voter signatures certified by the town clerk does two things. A, it compels the select board to post a special town meeting within, I think, 45 days of when the petition is received, and it requires that petition be on the warrant. So there's this sliding scale of difficulty of 10 to 100 to 200.
And that was just exercised recently.
And that's why we had the December town meeting.
Right.
That's correct. And I guess the other thing is, because the question comes up occasionally, and those numbers are not dictated on size of town, that's dictated just by open town meeting law.
Okay.
You could have a town with 1,000 people, or you could have a town with 30 or 40,000 people. Those numbers are not a percentage of voters. It's a fixed number in the law.
Quorum is decided by that.
Yes, the quorum is decided by bylaw, so I'll get into that. So Westborough has a town bylaw that's been in here for about 20 years that says for the annual town meeting and for this regularly scheduled special town meeting, there is no quorum. Again, it's in the charter and the bylaws that we have those meetings. People have been warned to be on the lookout for them. And the reason there's no quorum doesn't mean that we expect, that there to be 3 voters and people to vote on it. What it means is that the meeting can start without having to wait. Again, going back to the good old days, back in the 70s or 80s when I was a younger voter, it used to be that you'd have, I think we had a quorum of 150 at one point, and so you'd have 7 o'clock or 7:30 roll around on a Monday night, and you'd have 120 people there ready to get going. And people would literally be lined up at the payphone in the old high school lobby, calling people to say, come on, we need a quorum, will you please come down? And the meeting actually cannot start until a quorum is reached. So at that time, the town was presented with a proposal to essentially say, given that voters have plenty of knowledge that these 2 regularly scheduled town meetings are happening, why don't we have a quorum of 0 so the meeting can start on time?
So the meeting can start, and can votes happen as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, once the meeting starts, anything can happen. So now I'll tell you, our practice is,
Yeah.
because we occasionally have long lines outside of checking people in, the practice that Joe Harrington started and I've continued is that if you arrive online by the time the meeting is supposed to start, so let's say that, I get the kids fed, I get their homework started, and then I get to the high school at 7 o'clock. And there's a line out the door at 7 o'clock because of the, it does take time to check people in and do all that. My theory is that the meeting could start at 7, but it's fair that the people who are there on time be able to participate in everything. So I don't actually start the meeting until I run outside and I see who's about the last person who was there on time, and then I start the meeting when that person checks in. Another question, my wife actually overheard it at the December town meeting, is that, if you show up late, if you leave and come back, as long as you are a voter present in voting who's been sufficiently checked in by the town clerk's office, you can participate. So I think there was some confusion when people who were new to town meeting who saw that I wasn't starting the meeting until people who were there at 7 o'clock on that
Right.
Monday night. There were some people who thought like, oh, that means if I wasn't there at 7, you couldn't come in and you couldn't vote. That's not the case. Voters are allowed to come and go. They just always have to be checked in because, again, the working theory is that it's a vote of voters who are present and voting, so you have to be there. So let's just see. So the process is some of the rules. So that's our 50. Oh, and then for any other special town meeting that isn't one of those 2, there's a quorum of 50. That's just to make sure there's a sufficient number of people there before
If
I
it's
start.
sort of an it's not.
Essentially, there's like 15 or 30 days notice, but it's
Yeah.
not one that voters would
Not a
necessarily
regular
know.
one,
Yeah.
right, okay.
And then most actions are a majority vote. Some, including zoning bylaws and borrowing money, are a 2/3 vote. And then some other specific rules we have is that we have bylaws that essentially say that only voters and non-voters allowed by the meeting may speak. So what that comes down to is if you are a voter and you are registered and checked into the meeting, then if I call on you, you're allowed to speak before the meeting. If you are a non-voter, you're only allowed to speak before the meeting if the meeting itself has granted permission. And again, that's just, and again, this is another case where think of it as the meeting controls the meeting. So if people think that there's no need to hear from, out-of-towners or somebody, the meeting gets to decide. So if you watch town meeting or go to town meeting, a lot of time, I try to get ahead of time the list of the names and why. So we have outside experts who represent, lawyers representing either people or the town. And typically the town lets them speak, but it's not a requirement.
We used to have to write a letter asking permission.
There's a form to fill out that
Yeah,
says
each
what
one of
articles
them
and who
had
they
to
are. Yeah.
Be voted on
Uh-huh.
separately if
Yep.
you lived out of town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is that's no longer the case.
And then, and there's a form to fill out that says what
Right.
articles, who are they, and either a voter can sponsor them or they can sponsor themselves and
Yeah.
giving a short reason. It's usually, like I'm an architect for the blah blah blah, and I'd like to answer questions. Most of the time, I'll just say most of the times, not always, most of the times, those people are there so they can speak and answer questions.
Oh, yes, but this
it-
was permission for the department heads that lived out of town. We had to send a letter to.
Oh, that changed now. Now department heads
Yes.
are, because
So
I'd have about 20 people having to do that. Yeah. So the other thing is department heads are by default allowed to sit on town meeting floor and to speak, when they're voted, yeah. Let's see, a couple of other things. Oh, the rationale for why some things a 2/3 vote. The rationale for that historically is because there are some votes that are essentially binding the town to a specific action for quite a long amount of time. So a regular bylaw, like let's say we wanted to have a bylaw, let's make one up that's not too controversial. There really isn't one. Let's say
No such thing.
there aren't any that aren't
Is there
controversial.
such a thing?
Yeah, there aren't anything not controversial. Okay, well, let's say that we wanted to have a bylaw that said, that the sidewalk outside my house would be painted red. It's a dumb idea. So anyway, the idea, that's a town bylaw. That can be changed at any future town meeting. There is nothing that says that if the town approves a bylaw this year, that it can't change its mind. Now, think of other things. A zoning bylaw or borrowing money. If you have a zoning bylaw, you're essentially giving this amount of time from the time the town votes it until the time town changes its mind to vote it, that somebody could have come forward with a plan, gotten permits, and built a structure. So if you went from, if I said I wanted to turn my house in a residential area into a pub, then if I somehow cajoled the town into saying, let's rezone, my house as a pub,
Right.
First of all, doubtfully would pass. But the reason it would take 2/3 vote to do that is that once I converted it into a pub, if I did that, there's nothing that the town can do, if I follow all the zoning bylaws at the time, there's nothing the town can do to make me go back to being a
change it
resident
back,
house.
yeah.
So the idea from zoning is things can happen based on that individual vote that the town maybe have to live with for a
Yeah.
long, long time. It's similar with borrowing. The reason why borrowing takes a 2/3 vote is that this town meeting is essentially telling future town meetings, yeah, you don't have to vote to fund that, but if you don't pay your bills, something bad's gonna happen. So that's the rationale for why. And most other things are just majority vote. The quantum, so that's the quantum of vote thing. And then we also have a bylaw that says without permission of the meeting, each person can only speak twice on an article, and that's just to sort of control the dialogue. So a small number of people doesn't dominate. Of course, I have some leeway in terms of who I call on, and a lot of times I will check and make sure there's no new people who want to speak before I have somebody go back to the second one. But that bylaw is there more as a safety valve to say that if you want to make your case for trying to cajole people into voting your way, you get sort of two shots at it.
And is there
And
time
the only sort of the way that is not have to do with somebody asks a question. So for instance, if somebody asks a question of a proponent, they can answer as many times as they want, but what I tell them is that if your answer starts drifting into yet another persuasive essay, it's going to count as one of them.
And is there a time limit for speakers?
There is no set bylaw, but since I have been a moderator, my rule of thumb that I've tried to be consistent about is 2 and 2.5 minutes per speech. But if there are multiple voters or a committee representing multiple voters that wants to make a presentation at the beginning of an article to just sort of put it in play, and it takes more than 2.5 minutes to explain why you want to it might take more than 2.5 minutes to explain what you want to do with the new country club building or whatever they're going to do there. I typically give each side 10 minutes. So and again, there don't have to be two sides, but if something's controversial, I'll say, okay, you're the proponent. I'll give you and your pool of voters will use up one of your slots, and I'll give you 10 minutes. But then if a number of voters pool together and say, we'd like to talk why that's not a good idea, I give them an equal 10 minutes, and I try to do that essentially the same way.
So I wonder if we could turn a little bit to kind of just talking about some of the things that we were hoping to
Yeah, because I'm pretty much
also-
done, so yeah.
Oh, yeah, no,
so
I
that's
didn't
fine.
mean to
So-
interrupt you. I think this was really helpful for us to understand kind of what's written and what's practiced, and there's kind of both, and I think, the practice and, and what's in the bylaws, knowing what can and can't be changed, I think it was really helpful. I think one of the things, one of the sort of purposes that we want to kind of talk to you about is, in what ways can we make town meeting more inclusive? And I don't know if there's already been efforts to do that in the past that are, precede this committee. have you had other conversations about that? Because, we look at the town of Westborough, the population has grown. You have this great perspective of having, been the moderator through that population changes. And yet, I think the way that, because town meeting is, pretty standardized in New England, right? That hasn't changed as much as the population has changed.
Right.
And so how can we, given what's written, given practice, how can we adjust and grow with with the
Well, I'll tell you,
population is?
what I have done is I have done, in the time I have done some outreach to try to outreach to communities, at schools or, like the India, Pakistani population, the Asian population. I don't have, unfortunately, because I'm busy at my real job all day, and now that my kids have grown, I don't hang out at soccer fields, and I don't get to do much where I used to know people. So and I'll tell, and there are other voters who have also approached me about how to improve outreach, to improve, so essentially, if it's all about outreach, because outreach has multiple positives. It increases attendance, it increases the diversity of the attendance, and it makes people aware of exactly how our American form of government works. So one of the ways that I would gladly look for help is if there are organizations who want to have this, they don't have to have this, very stuffy presentation, but I'm more than willing to go and talk about people because admittedly, when I grew up in Westborough in the 60s and 70s, almost everybody in Westborough had lived in Westborough, or a town like Westborough, and everybody grew up knowing, like, yeah, there's a town meeting, yeah, it shows up, yeah, we go and vote. But now we have a much, if not a super majority of the population that comes from other parts of the world or other parts of the country, where it's either a county government or it's a whole different thing. And my concern is that many voters see a posting, on the DPW flasher for town meeting and don't even know that they can go and participate.
Right.
And so anything that you or anyone listening to this, if it's being recorded, can do to say, how do we get the word out to say, hey, if you're a registered voter, you can participate. And, and you can be a citizen legislator and you can help make these decisions. And if you're not a voter, that's okay too. We typically try to have a non-voter section. And as I said, there's a process for, if somebody, toward the tail end of her life, my grandmother lived with me and she was never became a U.S. citizen. She was a Scottish citizen. But if she had ever wanted to say, like, hey, this impacts me, she could be one of those people who said, hey, I'd like to go talk on this. And there is a process to allow people, to speak even if they're not a voter. So I don't want people to be dissuaded that, oh, I can't vote, why should I go? I'd like them to essentially pay attention and think about it, just because even if they can't go, if they just know what it's about, they can talk to their neighbors who can go and maybe say, hey, if you listen to this, this is what I'm interested, could you ask this question? And if so, I think I'm in favor of it, or if so, I think I'm against it, or whatever. So so one of the great things about your committee is you're in touch probably with a lot of different groups than I am, because my group is mostly talking to people at work who don't live in Westborough. And then, of course, I spend a lot of time going to meetings where I already know these people because I've appointed them or whatever. So any help you can do with that, and any group who would want to hear me or someone talk about what town meeting is and why it is and how it can get better, I'm all for that.
That's great.
So do we actually know the scope of the problem? So do we know the population of Westborough, the proportion of those people that are registered voters, and then the proportion of those registered voters that know about the town meeting system, and at any particular meeting know what's going to be on the warrant, and can speak English, because all of the publicity material I've seen has been in English.
Right, yes.
And then do we have a sense of what proportion of the registered voters do turn up to town meetings, are active? Yeah,
well, some of that we have data for and some of it we don't. In terms of how many people are aware of it, I don't know. But we do, the town clerk would have the exact numbers. We do know that the town's population is 20-something thousand now, and I believe there's either 12 or 14,000 registered voters, so that puts it so that puts it in that range. And then the town meeting is, as we know, typically we get 100 or 200, but we've had as many as 1,500 of people voting. So obviously, it's a relatively small percentage. So I think when we talk about the problem, I like to think about it not only as just the problem, but what does that reflect on? And so part of it reflects on people not being aware of what power they have. And another thing is what power people are comfortable delegating. And then we all know that one of the things that's happened toward the latter half of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century is the whole people's attention span and things like that. So it all comes down to just as there's been reduced, attendance at churches and things, we've seen some fluctuation. If there's nothing controversial on the town meeting, that's where we'll get the core 100, 250 people to show up. And then if you strike a nerve, you'll get 1,500 people to show up, which is nice, until you have to count it and you don't have no quick way to count it. But the flip side of that is people just say, I'll pre-ask the question. I'm not going to say you were going to ask it, but I've heard other people sort of mutter it. It's like, well, that's not a very big percentage of people voting on things, which is true. However, if you think about what the alternative was, if we had a city council, if we had a representative town meeting, we'd have our same population of like 24,000 people or 22, whatever it is these days, and we may have, let's say we have 220 people voting on it. That's still like what, 1%? And if we had a city council of 9 people, that's like 0.00 something percent. So, my view of the American system is that it all comes down to how people are willing to trade off their direct access to voting versus what are they comfortable with in terms of delegating that to people that they elect to take to essentially vote on their behalf. So open town meeting is at one extreme, we used to have 3 select board members, so there used to be 3, that was a very small, and then it's like, that's 3 people, and it wasn't voted by precinct, it was like, 3 popular people, and then it expanded to 5. So the problem in general is trying to find the sweet spot of awareness, admittedly inclusion and diversity, because that will change if you think about it, what I believe town meeting should be, or whatever form of government we have, you want the votes to reflect what the will of the people, of most people is. So essentially it's all the grand compromise. So you want to, and the goal is to walk away that each side had a chance to speak their piece, and at the end of the day, the voters decided. And my goal, overseeing an open town meetings, at the end of the day, I would like people to realize that people on both sides had adequate opportunity to present their case and then left it up to the voters. And so as you start reducing, what's the universe of voters? So if everything went to a ballot, then you could we know that local elections don't draw as much as presidential elections, and congressional elections typically don't draw as much as presidential elections. So, we've had cases where town elections have only had, their 1,500 people or 2,000 people vote. So it's a problem not just related to town meeting, but it's a problem about trying to get the community at large to not just shrug their shoulders and say there's nothing I can do, but instead to energize them and get to say oh, there is something I can do. What is it that I can do, and how do I fulfill that given the time and resources and attention that I have?
And I think the flip side of that is, as a town government, we also need not shrug our shoulders and say, well,
right.
We've done what we could.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
Because there's always more to do that you
Right.
can do to make it more accessible.
It's a two-way
Do you know
street.
what I mean?
In
So-
order for people to know, you have to give them avenues for them to know.
Exactly. And so one of the questions that we often ask is, what are the barriers to
Mhm.
access? What are the barriers to participation? And I think, language is something that we talk about a lot here, because, is it possible for the town meeting warrant or there's also the sort of persuasive, the document that talks about the reasons that things are on the warrant, and the impact, right? The impact sort of assessment of those.
Yeah.
Because just reading the sort of
Yeah.
motion
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
always give
Reading
you the
to say
whole
to see if the
picture.
town will do blah blah blah,
Yeah,
whereas you really
yeah.
need the article sort of summary to say this is what it's actually trying to do.
Precisely, yeah. So is that something that can be available, translated to multiple languages, like the school?
It's
for
probably just
example?
time and resources. So
Yeah.
yeah. There's no reason it can't be.
Right.
There's no reason it has to be, but there's no reason it can't be, and there's no reason it shouldn't.
Yeah, because I think that would, I wonder, to your question, just in terms of, if you look at all of those proportions, and then also what proportion of those people who are not showing up don't know about it because it's not been they've not received it in their own language. And it's so, I mean, it's very, it's almost legalese.
Well, unfortunately, that part of it
Yeah,
has to be,
has
because
to be
it has to be, but
understood,
you're right,
but-
but there, yeah.
But if you are someone who doesn't, it's complicated language. So,
Yes, right.
so if you
Yeah, it's
can
not an
read
easy
it
thing
in
to
your
translate, yeah.
own,
Mhm.
in your own
Mhm.
language, that would be much
Mhm.
more helpful, I think. So I wonder if that's something that, like, what would it take to do something like that? Do
Again,
you
I think
know?
it's just time and resources.
Okay.
I mean, since the,
And Google Translator.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
you
could
get-
be.
Because again, unfortunately, it all comes down, you need it to be done fairly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's almost, the same like what UN translators have to do. You have to figure out, how can I take the emotion out of it and actually communicate this idea? Again, just how I have to,
Yeah.
I run the meeting, trying to take a completely neutral point of view of not caring about how it turns out. My job is to get the voters to just know what they're doing, know what their action they're being asked to vote on, what it will do. Likewise with the translation, you have to try to make it neutrally clear about, it's hard enough in English to get people to write neutrally about what an article does, because it's very hard to get, even somebody who wants
Yeah.
to be neutral to not use terms that could sway one to say like, oh, that's a bad
Well,
adjective.
and
So
a word in English might not translate the same
Yeah.
way
Right.
Yeah.
in Egyptian or Chinese or
Right,
something.
right.
It might
Yeah.
mean something
Yeah.
totally different
And-
that puts a whole different spin on the.
And admittedly, part of this is that that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. That means you
Yeah.
have to
Oh, no,
ure
no,
you're
I'm
not.
just saying
No,
we
I
need
just
to
think,
make sure that-
as with everything we've done, it used to be that the warrant didn't have the article information on it. It just had the wording. And then you had to show up and go like, huh? And people would wait till somebody explained the motion. So that's when that get added in. And again, it took trial and error. So like this, it's a great idea. We have to figure out who has the time and the resources to do it. And then we just have to be cognizant of the fact it's not going to be perfect the first N
Yeah.
times, but that
Right.
doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So of course, we're also concerned about the provision of town services to the people and to make sure that the people that need those services are actually getting them. And this is the other side of the equation, right? The people giving into town government are, so people who are not putting into town government are probably strongly overlapping with the people who are not receiving the services that are provided by the
Yeah.
town.
Right.
And so finding those people and making them aware and finding out what they need is
Yeah, it's the ultimate catch-22. If you don't know you can change the universe, how do you
That's
change the universe? And so essentially, admittedly, to some extent, we rely on empathy of others who are hooked into the system to try to bring those along. But again, there should be more effort to try to, enable people to not have to rely on the empathy of others to say, hey, this is a service. So I don't know the history of it. Alma probably does, but there was the whole Asian outreach person at the Council on Aging.
I still have her.
Yeah, no, yeah. So, I mean, I remember I was on the finance committee, that got brought up. And again, there probably weren't a lot of, Asian people who were going to town meeting. Again, nothing against it, just, they weren't there. But the Council on Aging, and with Alma's support, realized there's a need. And again, they were the empathizers who said, this is a service that would really serve, our community, and then brought it forward. But so I think now we're at the point with this kind of conversation that it's like, how do we find more empathizers who can advocate for those people, but at the same time, in parallel, try to get the people who don't know or aren't empowered or who don't know the language? How do we move the process along so they feel more welcome, more inclusive, and we have to do our part, other than just saying, well, if you show up, we'll do what we can.
Right.
Another example is there are a few people in town who I think are either legally deaf or almost legally deaf, and luckily the school had acquired some hearing assistance devices, and I know I've heard from a couple of voters that they will, that they'll let the school know that they're going to be at the town meeting, and the town meeting will try to provide those.
That's great.
But again, I don't know, I'm not sure. I doubt there's any sort of public status of people to know about that. This
Right.
person just happened to know, and I didn't even know about it until he told me.
Right. We
And
need
so,
a PR campaign.
yeah, so essentially, so part of, we can, honk the horn about like, hey, look what we can do. And then when it's something like, ooh, that's a tough one, we can't do it, we can start thinking about ways to say, how do we, make steps along the way to being able to do that.
No,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
Go to-
Go ahead.
One of the things, because I think we heard it, and I'm sure it's not the first time it's
Mhm.
been raised, but we heard it this past fall. Our office, I know you heard
Mhm.
it, questions about the ability for residents participating remotely, being able to vote
Yeah.
from home. Do you just want to touch on that?
I'll touch on that briefly. Thanks for bringing it up. Yes, right, and I sort of came at it tangentially. Right now, the law is that the meeting is conducted on the dates, times, and places on the warrant.
Mhm.
So that means remote participation is not allowed unless unless your location becomes one of those date, time, and places. So
And a virtual location is not allowed?
no. No. I will say that during COVID,
Yeah.
the state allowed representative town meetings to experiment with that, and it seemed to go relatively well. And there are people who are trying to make that more permanent. I'm on what's called the Town Meeting 2040 Committee of the Massachusetts Moderators Association, where just before COVID, we did a number of brainstorming sessions about what are the barriers to having remote participation at town meeting, and we have a white paper on that I can try to get the link to or whatever. But I will tell you that representative town meeting is quite a bit easier because you have a finite number of people, and so if
Yeah.
the town wanted, they could buy, 220 Chromebooks, or they could buy Chromebooks for people who maybe don't have the technology, and then they could provide training for a finite set of people. Some of the barriers in any sort of virtual meeting, and it even goes to, back in the COVID times, if and when you held your meetings remotely. The barriers are, you have to know that the person voting is entitled to vote, and that's a little tricky if we had 1,000 people each in like 750 individual homes. How would you know that the person voting is actually a voter, and how would you make sure of that? So other things are the digital divide is a huge problem. There may be a number of people who it's another spin of the what if you don't know the language. Well, what if you know the language, but you don't know how, you don't have internet access, you don't have a particular device, and so even if you could solve the barrier of proving who you were, how would you make sure that the town could provide resources to everyone who
You'd
didn't
lose some
have?
seniors with that one.
What?
You'd
I know,
lose seniors.
precisely, yes,
Yeah,
because there's
exactly.
so again, it's a very delicate balance of fairness, and right now it may seem unfair that people have to show up, and we try to do what we do. I know the senior center typically runs buses on town meeting days, and other people volunteer, but doing it.
Childcare is provided.
What?
Childcare is
Yes,
provided.
yeah. Babysitting's another issue. I don't, for anything to happen related to town meeting, the schools and I have to approve of it, but it's not part of my or the school's responsibility to provide babysitting. In the past, there were a couple of very gung-ho volunteers who did it, and then that sort of fell through the cracks. But luckily, I got some volunteers for December who actually did set it up, and trying to keep in touch with them and make sure we can make that a more permanent arrangement. But yeah, so the whole so the whole remote participation is to say is just there's a lot of problems to solve, but that doesn't mean people aren't trying to solve it. It just means that there are a number of a number of problems that would have to be resolved.
We're not there yet.
Right, we're not there yet.
Yet.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cola, did you have something you were going to say before as well?
No, I think.
Oh, almost.
No, I did. So I think, as I think about all these things, I think that number one, our discussion is predicated on the fact that everybody who lives in town is first take off the 5,000 or 6,000 kids, so we're already down to less than 20,000 people.
Yeah.
But people who are foreign born, who are not
We're not citizens.
U.S. citizens,
Yeah.
and I don't know how, I mean, I know they may be in the census book, but I don't
Right, yeah, well, that's
know if
the difference between.
if they can register to vote. Well, obviously, they can't register to vote.
My belief is you have to be a citizen in order to
Yeah, I
register to
think you
vote,
do
so that's where
too.
it comes down to the registered
And
voters.
I think that I don't know if there's any way, either through Central Mass Regional Planning, or I don't know if that's the kind of record they keep when you fill out your, I don't know, my census form, it doesn't ask if I'm a citizen, it just asks if I'm a voter, but, I think that if we had a better handle on how many people who live in this town are here on student visas or work visas, or they're
Mhm.
resident aliens,
Right.
or whatever.
Right, what's the target sample
The ones-
size
the
of
ones
all,
that
what's the
can't-
universe
that
of people who
couldn't
could vote
even
if they
we
wanted to?
them
Yeah, right, yeah,
Exactly,
right, yeah.
like, what
Yeah.
are we looking at?
Yeah, the town clerk may know, or
Find
even
out.
maybe MISGI. Again, I'm sure there are experts who know how to read the outcome of the census books who might figure that out. But I'd say the town clerk's office might be the best at sort of breaking down here's the population, here's how many registered voters there are, and then you look at the difference and say,
Yeah.
what is that difference comprised of? People under 18.
Yeah.
And that breaks you down to another set. And then of that set, is it because they've moved into town and they're just not involved and they haven't registered? You know, I mean, I know when my kids moved out after college and moved to where they live now, I pestered them to register to vote.
Yeah, me
You know,
too.
not every kid is motivated of their things to do is to register to vote, but
Yep.
I pestered my kids to register to vote when they were 18 downstairs. And when they moved, I said, have you registered to vote yet?
Yep.
And a lot of times it's not until like a presidential election or a hot topic comes up that they
Well,
say
I
like,
think
oh, what do I do?
My son's been registered to
Yeah.
vote in most of the suburbs of the city of
Yeah,
Boston,
right.
so.
Yeah, so that might be an interesting study, would be to find out of the people who are over 18 and not registered voters, how many are not voters because they don't know, how many can't do it, and how many people would be interested in knowing what they'd have to do if they wanted to do it. And that would be it. That could be an interesting.
So that
thing
would be
to
it.
know.
Maybe we can actually invite our town clerk to, as a guest speaker in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah.
Or we could at least do,
Yeah.
do some research. and
Pre-ask those
talk.
questions and see
to-
what you can come up with.
Talk to her
Yeah.
before our next meeting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
John, are you aware of any communities that have had successful efforts to increase participation?
From my participation on the Mass Moderators Association, all of us are always trying, and some towns try. I mean, I'll tell you a few things that have been tried, and I haven't heard that they've been abandoned.
Okay.
So I think that means they've been sufficiently successful.
It's
None of
probably
these are
many
these are
things will have
groundbreaking, but I'll tell you
incremental- Yeah.
what some towns, we've never done it probably because of money. Some towns send out a copy of the warrant or a postcard announcing the warrant to every mailing address in town, or at least to the registered voters. So again-
With the red book every year.
Yeah, and so now that the tax bills come out in January, the warrant wouldn't be accessible, but certainly there could be, one of those inserts we get in our tax bills
Yeah.
saying like, hey, don't forget the date, town election, town meeting, and then say as it gets closer, go to the town website to see.
But
So-
that would only hit that would only hit property owners.
Yes.
So we
Well,
wanna make sure that it went
but
out
renters
to-
who have addresses. I mean, if you're a renter and you had a mailing address. you'd
Sure,
still get
mailing,
one.
right, but
Yeah.
if it was an inclusion in a tax bill.
Oh, yes, that's the downside. Yes, the
Yeah.
downside of the tax bill is
Mhm.
that people who are like renters don't get them. Yeah.
Right,
But also remind them that
Yeah.
if you haven't registered to vote, you need to be
Mhm.
registered.
Right, by a
By
certain
a
day,
certain
yeah,
day.
yeah,
Fifth
so,
or
yeah,
whatever,
so something that doesn't cost a lot of extra money other than printing is putting that in a tax bill, but yes, it has its downsides, that it reaches the same choir that we're already preaching to, it's not the new choir.
Yeah, right.
The postcard going direct mail would cost money, so some towns, I think, just send a postcard that has a link to, the website, but of course, that's the digital divide problem, is you could have people getting a postcard that says, well, it's really great that they've given me this link, but I don't have a computer, I don't have a phone, whatever.
You can
And some
include the
towns, I
library-
believe, actually send
The
out the,
information about the library, because people can go to the library
yeah,
to.
yes, well, right, that's where you can tell
Yeah.
people, by the way,
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
services the library or the senior center offers is having
Right.
public access computers, and could improve the use of other town services too.
Right.
And I'm sure there are plenty of volunteer groups who would do that. We could even,
Mhm.
have couple nights at the library or where volunteers or at the council, or at the senior
Yeah.
center, where people could say, here, I'll show you how to do it. I've actually, because of COVID, I hadn't done it, but I'll try to start doing it again. I've actually tried to have forums, public meetings the week or two before, once the warrant is closed, where I take a non-judgmental approach to just explaining what articles are, and I answer questions from people. I've done that at the library, I've done it in this room, and if I get time, I might try to do that this year, or certainly again by the fall, now that the worst of COVID seems to be done. It's not so much getting people to the town meeting, it's more of, there are some people who feel that it's too, and I'll tell you both sides, some people feel it's too easy to so pack the meeting with one side. So for instance, this is, it used to, if you have the warrant, then without a 2/3 vote of town, the articles come up in the order they come up in. So it could be like, oh, we're Article 10.
Yeah,
Have a bunch of people stay at home, call me when we're at Article 7, I'll get in the car and come down, they vote and then they leave. And a lot of people always say like, oh, that's just not fair. Well, the point is that both sides have access to getting those people, and people can come and leave as they want. And so it may not be the best behavior that we want, where we'd love everybody to be, hang on every word and hang on every vote. But at least it's fair that both sides have the ability to bring out the people on
No, and
board
it's
their side.
broadcast live on
But
Westborough
for
TV,
people who
so-
say like, oh, there are some towns that do a random draw approach to which article comes up
I see.
next. And I think it was to partially address that or whatever. So, it requires like a town bylaw to do this, because it would essentially say the select board puts a warrant these are the warrant articles. And then it's almost like a bingo
It's
type
randomized,
thing.
yeah.
Okay, Article 5. The only drawback with that is there are some articles that very much are predicated on this one will
Sure.
only happen at this one. So what towns have done in that situation is essentially bundle them into packages. So
Yeah.
like, let's say we had the 2 library articles in October and December. One was the money and one was the zoning. Acting on one before the other or doing them wildly apart wouldn't make sense. So in that case, I would work with the select board to essentially do that as one package, and we'd spin the wheel and go like, okay, we're gonna do that. So I'm not sure in today's day and age with technology where people can text and call people to say, hey, I think we're about a half an hour away. Those are the things that immediately come to mind. I will pay special attention and ask as our moderators and meetings come up. But a lot of it's just the signs like we do, mailing out to people who don't know, and a lot of it just has to do, again, going to the information flood and the attention span we have is, how do you get people who don't see your typical avenues of communications to what are the new avenues to reach them? It used to be the newspaper was the way to go, but now many people don't get the newspaper, and local newspapers aren't as vibrant as they used to be. And even though I've never had problems getting anything that about any events I've had published, I'm not sure that reaches new people as many as you'd think. So that in itself is not just a town meeting problem. It's a 21st century, any organization problem of how do we get to new people or different people, and so that could be a whole, that could be you could have like 7 of us lined up here with you brainstorming how do we address
Yeah,
that problem,
absolutely.
and
it
that could
impacts-
be useful. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, Kim can tell you on behalf of the select board and the town manager, like with the country club building committee, they're trying to reach a universe of people some who care a lot about the country club, some who don't, and they're trying to get a committee. But again, other than putting it on the website, sending out emails, announcing it at meetings,
Right.
Getting it in the paper, it's still not clear that's reaching that many new people. So some of it is just you got to get people who do see it to say, hey, if you know anybody who you think this is a good fit for,
Right.
forward it to them and let them know.
Right.
So, unfortunately, I've got another obligation on the hour, but I'd just like to thank you for
Okay.
the information.
Yeah, I'm
you've
sorry I
given
took so
us.
much time. I hope,
No,
hope it was
very
useful.
good.
But I'd also like to recognise the skill with which you've conducted the town meetings that I've been to.
Thank you.
I've been most impressed with the tightness that you've done.
Thank
that.
you. I try very hard to run them fairly and efficiently, and it's always a tight line. And I think at the bottom of page 4, that my goal is fair and civil discourse and thoughtful deliberation. In today's day and age, that's not an easy task. But I try to make sure people know that's the goal.
Yeah, sometimes I think you're a master of restraint.
Thank-
And
My
I
kids
also
know that
appreciate-
I'm more restrained at town meeting than I am at home. That I will tell.
I appreciate your receptiveness to all, just to having this open conversation. I think it's more of a brainstorming. I think
Yeah,
there are
and
a
I'll
lot
certainly
of
come back. I
ideas
mean,
that
I don't
we
want you to
can
think this is
throw
all
out.
there is. I mean,
Yeah,
and as I
that's
said,
fun.
there's 1 or 2 other people who have approached me also,
Yeah.
not necessarily as much with the diversity inclusion. So this is great to bring up language barriers and things like that
Yeah.
that are tough problems without time, money, and resources. But in terms of like I have other people, so I don't think they came. I invited them here in case they wanted to listen in. But
This is
I'll-
being recorded by Westborough.
Okay, good, so I'll make sure they know, because
Yep.
I do ask, any groups, you can go if you're here, any groups, anybody that wants to know more about town meeting, with the goal of learning how it works, especially groups who are dedicated to spreading the word, I'm more than willing to do stuff just like this, or to have a completely informal discussion, and just let people ask questions and see where it goes.
Just say, I'm working on the March calendar, you're welcome.
Okay, if you have, send me an email with potential times, and if I can fit it into my work
We have to
schedule.
adjourn.
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah,
gonna-
We're gonna
I mean,
work
just to
on
do
that.
like a session at
So-
the senior center?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So unfortunately, we need to adjourn.
Okay, that's
because
fine.
of,
We can continue the discussion after we've
Yeah,
adjourned.
yeah. So a motion to adjourn, yes, and second, and,
and thank
All
you
in
for
favor?
thinking to
okay,
invite me.
we are adjourned, thank you.
It's always nice when people come and approach me about how can I make town meeting better,
No,
and it's not
it's-
me bothering the
We
same people.
appreciate it, this has been a topic for us
Yeah.
over several meetings.
And feel free to invite me back after you've thought about it, because it could be you're gonna be sitting at home
Yeah.
watching TV and go like, oh, what if we did this? You
Yeah,
know, and it could be
definitely.
something, that I've never thought of, or it could be we just gotta say, let's find the people to try it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
after you've attended town meeting in Westborough and realized how well it's run, it's very hard to go to town meeting where you might
Well,
live.
thank you, Rob.